Mike Murray's baby is adorable.
Good evening again, everybody. We're reconvening back into open session. Welcome to our May 18th work session. We're going to move ahead with our agenda. We have a resolution in front of us authorizing a memorandum of understanding with the EAPSC, Educational, Administrative, and Professional Staff Council. Do I have a motion?
I motion we consider this MOU.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Ms. Kirby, I believe you were going to give us a little bit of explanation on this one.
Yes, so to give some background on this resolution, we are seeking to add a position to the EAPSC Association Staff Council, which represents our administrators. This evening, I will be recommending that we add a position of Coordinator of Career Tech Ed and Student Support, and you see that listed right under the other coordinators on this document. This is a new position that we are going to be adding. The reason that we want to add this position is because there are two key areas of focus that we really want to add some additional support on. The first is in the area of career and technical education. We have been engaged in a year-long study in our college and career task force where we've not only looked at the work that's happening around college enrollment and increasing those outcomes, but also our career and technical education program. We know that we are the anchor partner district in the five district consortia. We definitely have the most students who are participating in the program. And so we want to be able to provide very focused support right at the school site around CTE. Some of the things that we've been discussing in the task force, and we'll have the formal presentation in June, are the need for additional professional development and instructional support for our teachers to improve the CTE metrics, more coordinated opportunities to promote the CTE program from our elementary schools to our middle schools and through the high school so that more students are taking advantage of those opportunities, really ensuring that students have access to work-based learning and really have rich work-based learning experiences, and so we need a coordinated opportunities to provide more of that to students as a part of the program. We also need, we want to get ahead of some teacher recruitment because there are some programs that we will be seeking to bring back in SY23, especially around our computer programs in particular. We also, in our strategic plan for our 2025 strategic plan, are adding very specific metrics around CTE performance and CTE program, and so that's just for the Heights District, that's not for the consortium, and so we'll need a lead there. There are multiple indicators also in CTE, where somewhere we've we have had some success, and others we definitely need work. So we've had really great success with our 4-year and 5-year graduation rate. We want to continue to improve that. We want to improve reading, math, and science proficiency for our CTE students at Heights. That's a part of the CTE report card. We want to continue to have strong post-program placement outcomes, but also work on things like technical skills, credentialing, and the college application and scholarship process. That also includes if students go into job training programs, because we want them to be able to take advantage of scholarship opportunities in those types of programs as well. So that is on the CTE side. Again, someone just to work at Heights High, really focused on the program here. On the student supports side, a couple things. We know that we will have many students returning next year who have not been in the building, and there are going to be many things we'll need to support students around in terms of acclimating back to more traditional high school culture. So this year we really had struggles around attendance. We want to make sure that we have a positive school climate going into next year. We have positive behavior incentive systems that we have started to train staff on, and we'll be doing deeper implementation next year. And then we want to really make sure that we have SEL supports and better outreach to our families to support students. So that particular role will just essentially be a culture and climate lead at the high school, not only doing positive work with students, but also, positive work with staff as well, because we're all one community here at Heights High. So it's a coordinator position. It does not rise to the level of a director, which is why we did not just seek a recommendation for the director position that's in the EAPSC. We felt it was appropriate to place that position in EAPSC, but at the coordinator level. So that's some background on that role and position. This doesn't represent, again, this is just the contract in EAPSC. This is not, an indication of administrative raises or anything like that. Just to be clear, we're simply adding a position in their contract that we can offer.
And for additional clarity, there is the Director of Career and Technical Ed and Partnerships with the 260 contract days. That is not filled.
That is not filled. So this represents all of the positions that could possibly be filled in the EAPSC in Cleveland Heights. So that's all this is. Just like if you go into contracts for other unions, there are positions that may lay there, but they're not filled. It's very similar to that.
Right. And and you have the authority to fill those in your roles.
Right.
Right. So I think that needs to be clear. So Brad Callender was the former Director of Career Tech and Partnerships. And what I like about what I'm hearing from you, Liz, is, well, first of all, if you just looked at our board goals for you, I think the first item listed is to have a better understanding and an improvement plan for our career tech. Mm-hmm. We went through quite a change when Mr. Callender left our organization, and at the same time, our superintendent at the time chose to give those responsibilities to the high school principal, which is already an overwhelming job in itself. So I can see nothing but good with this. I mean, we have a position, we have a definite need of, so we have Katrina Myers, which is basically head of the consortium, right, which is the 5 districts. And I see her role, and I think we are working on a survey and an audit to help us better understand this.
Yep.
But basically, that's how all the schools are getting connected. Then we have our own staff members that basically run the internal programs that our teachers essentially report up and through. And I think that's been missing. So I'm pretty happy to see this because I think it's going to give support to everybody. I understand that this is, we're taking one step at a time in this evaluation. Is that and there will be further CT recommendations.
Oh, yeah, this is one of multiple, yeah. At the June work session, we're going to share the recommendations
Okay,
coming out of the task force, College and Career Task Force.
I get it. I've been doing a lot of talking, sorry. Do any of you have any comments or thoughts?
Well, career tech ed has been one of my main focal points for years now. So anything that will help our programs improve and help our students have better outcomes, I'm in favor of. And I'm looking forward to the June meeting.
Any other items?
Just that I like the flexibility that having this position in the menu will offer.
If there's no other comments, Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Ms. Serini.
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes,
Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Mr. Posh.
Yes. Let's move on to the consent agenda. This pretty much embodies pretty much the balance except for two items on the our agenda tonight. Do I have a motion?
I motion we consider the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion?
I was just happy to see all the teachers who will be working in our summer program. That's a great list.
If there's no other discussion, Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll?
Ms. Serini.
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes,
Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Mr. Posh.
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Ms. Kirby, let's move on to the social emotional learning part of the agenda.
All right. I am pleased this evening to share the work that has been coming out of our Educational Services Department and out of our schools as relates to social emotional learning. So joining us this evening, we have a very large team that is composed of counselors, social workers, some of our leadership around specialized services, a key partner in our work, Dr. Dakota White-King, and Nancy Pepler, who is also going to join with some PPS updates as well. So I'm going to turn this over right now to, I believe it will be Dr. White, am I correct, Karen? That's going to lead the presentation.
I was hoping we were going to have Mike Murphy's baby talk to us.
Yeah.
That is a cutie pie.
Okay, great. Well, the social and emotional work in the district is connected to strategic plan goals 1, 2, and 3. Our theme as a district this year has been ACE, adaptability, collaboration, and equity. Again, adaptability, collaboration, and equity definitely inform the social and emotional work in the district, particularly this year, given the circumstances surrounding the pandemic and the needs of our staff, students, and families. The next slide, please. The social and emotional work in the district is supported by our school counselors, our social workers, the supervisor of community and school partnerships, our Cleveland State University partner, and the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Bradley, and she's going to go through, a glossary of terms for the evening. Ann?
It would help if I would unmute, because that happens to me a lot, old age. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. So this is your glossary of terms. We use these so much. An attendance intervention plan, AIP. Those are the plans that are taking place for our students that are having attendance issues in the district. And there's a certain criteria that has to be met before they qualify. Attitudes related to trauma-informed care scale called Arctic. It's a scale that we, the counselors and social workers, and I believe administrators had a presentation on. It's something that we're looking at implementing in the fall to see what our staff needs. So we recognize that trauma is not just about our kids, it's about our staff too, and what they've been through and what we need to do to meet their needs and what they think the kids' needs are. CTE, career technical education. I think you just had a wonderful conversation about that. Career-based intervention, CBI, is a term that is used for our high school students, and it's something that is, it's something that we do to encourage students to get jobs, to start when they're in high school, or to build the skills up for they're in high school so that when they graduate, we know that they can be employed. CSU is Cleveland State University. Community Learning Center is CLC. The Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services, sometimes we know this one too well. CCD, CFS, those are the people we call if one of our students, if we suspect any kind of abuse in the family. Educational Service Center, ESC, they are the service center that serves Cuyahoga County. And the favorite thing they did for me this year was give me my vaccination. So I was very happy to be at the ESC this year, probably more than I've ever been. Gender and Sexuality Alliance, the GSA, this is a group that is run in our middle schools and our high school. It's run by our social workers. Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. We do have some of our social work interns come in from there, and Case Western also does some surveys for us, and we participate in those yearly, and then those become part of the survey for the state of Ohio. House Bill 410, School Attendance and Truancy Law. So this is the bill that actually ties into the AIP, the attendance plans, the attendance intervention plans. So this is the law that says and guides our social workers through their work with our students for attendance plans and for attendance overall. National Network of Partnership Schools. This is the network of schools that that we partner with and that are available to partner with nationally. Post-secondary planning system, PPS. I don't know why, but I want to always call this one PSS. This is the system that we've had in place for about a year. And it's being guided by Nancy Pepler and Wendy. And it's what we're using to find resources for our kids, and to help guide us in finding appropriate resources. And I think the big thing, helping to track who's utilizing what with our community partners. And it helps us also look to see what the services that we can give our students. Student assistant team, SAT. Is that me? No? Did you guys hear that? It was okay. The student assistant team meets at least bi-weekly in each school, and it consists of counselors and social workers and nurses and teachers. And it is the team that we use to literally assist our students and support our students in their academic learning. And it can include some behavioral interventions also in support. And we also use that team to reach out and support our parents. Social emotional learning, SEL. Social emotional learning is the teaching, follow-up, and support of the skills that our students need to deal with the current challenges of today. And I think of everything on this page, that might be the most important one given the year that we have all had. I don't have to tell any of you how hard this has been on all of us. So SEL is something that we are supporting in our schools. It is also required by the state. And then trauma-informed care, TIC, that is looking at where our students are coming from and then developing plans to help support them emotionally, academically. And again, our trauma-informed care and our trauma-informed plans include our staff, it includes our parents, because we're all, everybody experiences trauma. Social emotional learning.
Oh, and I think this is mine. It's okay.
Sorry, Betsy.
It's okay. Good evening, Superintendent Kirby, board members, and other district members and attendees. I just want to personally thank you for giving us an opportunity to really share highlights of what we all believe is really important work that we do. And talk about social emotional learning. I just want to highlight, I like to think of it like a house. If it is strong and well functioning, if there is a foundation. If there isn't a foundation, it's crumbling. And so that's what social emotional learning is. And it's really our job, all of our jobs, to be helping our young people form that foundation by increasing their self-awareness, their self-control, their relationship skills, their decision-making skills. All of that leads to what we hope to be a positive future self. Okay, next slide.
Good evening, everyone. So as you all have been hearing, tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about social and emotional learning. And for this year, social and emotional learning was very important, but I think all schools across the country have seen the importance due to the pandemic. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the themes that our students have faced this year and how we can better support them. Next slide. So one of the big things that we're seeing across the country, though, is how do we quantify this work? So you will hear the counselors and the social workers talk about needs assessments and things that they have done this year. But across the country, what we're also finding is that people are having a hard time addressing how do we measure SEL? How do we know if students are growing? So we're going to be talking about some of the things also that we are doing to help address that concern as well. So again, like we said, nationally, schools are they're looking for tools. So tonight you will also hear Ms. Pepler talk about the PPS system and how that system can support our school counselors, our social workers, and administrators with helping address the needs of students. You also will hear us talk a little bit about the Arctic, like Ms. Bradley talked about, which is also an assessment tool, looking at how do people feel about trauma-informed care. And we'll talk more about that later on in our presentation. So tonight's focus, we have two focus areas. We're going to talk a little bit about what is actually happening in Cleveland Heights, University Heights to address social and emotional learning. So you're going to hear about state initiatives, different things that the school counselors and the social workers are doing, along with teachers as well and administrators. You're also going to hear us talk about how do we quantify this work to make sure what we're actually doing is impacting students, not only academically, but socially and emotionally as well. So the work at CHUH, it's also this work at Cleveland Heights, University Heights. What I've been noticing is that we're also looking at state initiatives to make sure that the work that we're doing at Cleveland Heights also aligns with the work at the state level. So what you'll find 3 documents in here that talk specifically around ODE and the work that is happening at ODE to support the work that's happening at all of the schools throughout the state. So the first one is the ODE SEL standards. And if you click on the link, you'll see the standards that were developed in 2019 to support K through 12 schools. You'll also see in the document, the Ohio Department of Ed Whole Child Framework, which is now a new document that was released last year before the pandemic that we were actually working on at the state level, looking at how do we support all children from a whole framework. And then last but not least is the Ohio Department of Ed Cleveland State University School Climate Document, which was created during the pandemic to pretty much give strategies to support schools and to promote a positive school climate due to the pandemic. So when the school counselors and the social workers were creating their plans, all these various things were taken into consideration. So we're not going to bore you with data, but we will be talking about data tonight. So you will hear the counselors, the social workers, and administrators talk a little bit about process data, which is like how many students did they meet with, how many families were impacted by the work. And you may also hear us talk a little bit about perception data, which is like how do students feel after they received some of the services? Were they better? And how do we move forward? So later on, we'll talk about results data and how do we get to those outcomes that we want. So now we're going to have Dr. Michelle Jackson talk about the needs assessment at the elementary level.
So good evening, everyone. So to quantify our work, we know that data drives the direct and indirect services that we provide to our students, families, and teachers. And to provide services, direct and indirect, we administer needs assessments to both teachers and students. Data collected from the needs assessment is a way for us to identify and to determine how to bridge gaps for students and teachers during the pandemic and as we return back to school. Specific themes emerge from the results of our pre-assessment data. So for our students, several reoccurring themes emerged that were profound. It was amazing to see students vocalize their needs in their own ways. They were feeling frustrated, worried, overwhelmed, and anxious about completing assignments and logging in, not being able to focus and pay attention during remote learning, and ultimately returning back to school. So to address our needs, their needs, whole group, small group, and individual social emotional learning guidance lessons were conducted. And as a result of the lessons taught, based on our attendance data, more students were beginning to log in on time. And after several guidance, social emotional lessons were taught, when students were asked, give me an emotion, students began to express feelings of being excited and happy about completing assignments and overall feeling safe about returning to school. Meeting with students also provided invaluable opportunities to reach out and to actually engage more with our parents and our guardians and to provide them with much needed resources. Our teachers who completed surveys, the themes that emerged were lack of class participation, lack of focus, and following directions. Once again, The data from the guidance lessons conducted, students began to engage more during instructional lessons, and students being able to self-advocate, asking their teachers for support and help when needed. Teachers and staff were provided with resources about trauma-informed care. And overall, our goal was and still is to continue to help our students, families, and teachers feel safe, supported, valued, and more importantly, being heard through our lenses of adaptability, collaboration, and equity. Finding innovative ways to level the playing field was our goal. And it was truly gratifying to help students experience success in the current unique learning environment we are in, and to help teachers and families to feel supported during these unprecedented times. Mike, no, and Bradley, I believe.
So at the middle school, we also did needs assessments and pre-assessments, and no surprise, we found out that our kids experienced some losses, that they were really struggling to come back to school. They're feeling overwhelmed and very high levels of anxiety. And so we developed programs to help our students deal with all those things. Mr. Murray?
All right, so at the high school, I think that we're seeing the same themes from K through 12. So the first thing that we have to keep in mind is like loss. So obviously some of our students have lost a family member or lost a support system during COVID. So we need to be cognizant of that and be able to provide grief counseling and other supports. But also I think about like the loss of this year for them. So like my seniors, what did their senior year look like? And every year has its milestones. So when we're bringing kids back into the building, or even next year when we're working with students, we have to understand that they have lost the year of their high school experience. So what kind of things can we do to support them during that transition, and maybe special programming to help get them acclimated to the building next year. Anxiety. So typically high school is a very anxious time anyway for students, but we did run into some things that I didn't anticipate this year. For example, like being on screen has been a very anxiety provoking thing for many kids. And so the counseling department, we've had to adjust 504 plans or have meetings about how to accommodate students who may not want to turn their camera on during a classroom session. And I can totally understand that. Like, you are opening yourself up to your class, your teachers, you're displaying your environment, your family, your home. So those are things that are not necessarily what kids are doing in a typical classroom setting. And then feeling overwhelmed. I think that this year we've given students and parents a bunch of different options for education. And sometimes it can be overwhelming, like which is the right program for my child? Is that Ohio Online or a hybrid model or 100% face-to-face? And sometimes, I've heard from parents and grandparents that say, did I make the right choice? Is this the right model? So we've had to make adjustments in selections to try and help them through that process. Also, just being overwhelmed with the technology. In the guidance office, we would typically get parents, grandparents, people come into the office frequently to have meetings about academic concerns, just to do a check-in with us. And at the beginning of this year, at least, without that option, I know that a lot of families were feeling like, oh my gosh, how is my kid logging on every day? Like, how does Zoom work? How are we getting the tech? My internet is having issues. So it seemed to be like a lot for our families, but I really do feel like the staff at the high school and in all the buildings really have been cognizant of that and made sure that we were being flexible so that kids could get their education. And then additional resources. So how could we help our staff? Knowing that the teachers are the ones that are seeing the kids in the classroom, they're the ones that are on those front lines. They're seeing all of our students. So we made it a big point to make sure that our teachers had all the resources and training that they needed.
So you all have heard about the needs And in order to address the needs this year, the school counselors and the social workers, they came together and they actually created trauma-informed action plans to address the specific needs of their building. So some may ask, what is trauma-informed? Basically, it's just realizing what are the needs of the students based on things that they have been exposed to. But not only recognizing the signs and the symptoms related to trauma, but also then creating plans and creating strategies not to traumatize students in the classes and in the schools, and also making sure that we don't re-traumatize students. So when you think about trauma-informed action plans, the goals really were around using the data and then making sure that we were not traumatizing students or re-traumatizing students based on things they have been exposed to. So we're going to hear about the great work that actually happened at the elementary level, middle school level, and the high school level. Mrs. Race is going to share what actually happened at the elementary level with the trauma-informed action plans.
This is a lot. I'm just going to tell you, I'm listening to this and I walk this walk with all these people every day, and I'm doing one of these like, whoo. So I'm going to take a big, deep breath, because this is a strategy that I use and many of us use in our schools. We do it daily, like as a building, and most of us do. It's one way to help us center and focus ourselves so that we are ready to help our kids manage through their emotions of the day. I have a sticky note. Okay, I'm trying to get to the camera. That I have about 10 of these up all over the place. And it's something that's my mantra, and I believe it's the mantra of my colleagues also. I ask myself every day, what can I do to normalize school for my kids, knowing what they're coming in with and what this world has been. In addition, I feel like we're repeating, but I have to say it. We support at the elementary level our teachers, because yes, they are the ones on the front lines with the kids. I might see kids at temperature check, but it's the teachers that are seeing them not seem or feel quite right, and something's going on. So we support the teachers to support the students, helping them to manage through their anxiety, because they have it too, just like the middle and high school kids, about remote, return, change, somebody having a positive COVID test and having to stay home in quarantine, loss, fear, masks, shields, all of it. We offer mindfulness strategies, daily motivational quotes, reminders of self-care, not just for all of the kids and the staff, but our own selves, reflection to support staff and students and parents if we see something going on. We do lessons that are at whole group, small group, and individual needs based on the survey data and based on requests from students, teachers, and staff and parents. So in all of our schools, there is a time set aside at every staff meeting to talk about trauma. I've never talked about trauma like we've talked about it. You know, we've talked about trauma-informed care for a few years, but we are now living it and working on it, so it's part of the tapestry of what we do in our schools. There's a link on the bottom of this slide, so when you look back, that shows one of our elementary trauma-informed plans, and every school in the district has one. We worked collaboratively to make sure that we were all able to get a plan that really made sense. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So all students and staff at the elementary level, we believe, has benefited from the work that we've put into our trauma-informed action plan. And we believe that because we offered it universally. It's there for everyone. We work in tandem. I can't probably emphasize this enough. Arm in arm with our social workers, our nurses, our school psychologists, our principals, our secretaries, our lunch staff, our security, and yes, yesterday for me, the bus driver. So these people, along with everybody else, including our parents, is the team we need to do this kind of work. Next slide. So we decided to kind of break down how we have offered some of these services and supports at this slide and the next slide are the rest of the elementary schools, and you can just look through all of them. But the left column is the number of students who participated in classroom guidance, small group, and individual at each building. That is a pillar. That structure of whole group, small group, and individual is a pillar to school counseling programming. So we made sure that we have offered that in a variety of topics based on need. In the second category is the number of families that we referred for additional services. It could be something like housing need. It could be something like food issues. It could be a family that doesn't know how to get set up with care source. It could be somebody that needed help with IT and technology. And those numbers there in meeting with the elementary counselors, we believe is small for us. And we believe that's because COVID really affected things like meeting with your mental health counselor. You know, limitations due to COVID and social distancing really decreased that. And we believe and expect to see that number to be higher next year. And then the third category is the number of students who have worked with our community partners. Community partners will be discussed later in this presentation, but I'd like to make a notation because the numbers look really different in a couple of the schools. But Boulevard, Garrity, and Oxford house our monthly food drives from the Cleveland Food Bank. And we offer that not just to the community, but to our own families in each of the schools, and we keep that data. So when you see a number that looks much bigger than one of the other schools, it's really attributed to that monthly offering that we have for our community. So I just wanted to note that. Thank you. Ann Bradley, you are next.
So at the middle school level, we are providing the services to our students based on the needs that I mentioned. And, you know, we all know that middle school kids were kind of in our own little category, right? So our needs, they also shift on a daily basis. And I feel like, a student can be going along just fine, and then they kind of just have a meltdown, and then they're great later. So we met with the 4 counselors from Monticello and Roxborough work very, very closely together. And we have developed quarterly social emotional lessons based on the slide. I think it was the 3rd or 4th slide that has the 5 SEL requirements. So we have developed a lesson for each of those. And then we meet quarterly with every class at Roxborough and at Monticello to present the lessons. One of the neatest things for me was when we did our first one, I honestly wasn't sure how the kids would respond because we're virtual. And they were so amazing. They jumped in. One of the things was go get something that makes you feel safe. You can't believe the kids that brought blankets and stuffed animals, and they participated. And it was really neat because we weren't sure how the virtual lessons were going to go, but we had a very positive outcome from them. We facilitate groups based on the needs of students. We have grief groups. We have groups to support our students with behavioral needs. We have academic groups, and we did meet with those groups online virtually. And again, quite a challenge to do a group online versus in person. You know, competing with lunch sometimes with the middle school kid, we would lose. So, you know, we had to kind of work that out. We do provide referrals to families for outside agencies and community partners. That's a big, big part of our job. We do provide individual counseling sessions to students on transitioning them back to school and just on being a middle school student. And the other thing that we do quite a bit of is we talk to parents in middle school, because some of you that went through middle school with me and your students, we got to know each other really well because we saw each other quite a bit, because middle school students, sometimes parents are feeling really overwhelmed with their students during regular times. And so during a pandemic, it became very, very necessary to have those meetings. And then we consult with staff to identify who's experiencing stressors, and we then meet with them. And we also work closely with staff. We have bulletins we put out. I put out a bulletin once a week for our staff to deal with their emotional, to support them emotionally. at our staff meetings, our social worker always does something on self-care. And I do a lot of individual meetings with my staff just to support them when they're kind of having a bad day. They come down and we just talk through things because they are also experiencing this trauma. Next slide, please. So the number of staff at Monticello is 48, and the number of staff at Roxborough is 47. The number of students impacted is 550 and 550 because we do our quarterly lessons and we meet with every student in the school during those quarterly lessons. And then the next slide. So you can see here the number of families referred for additional services. At both schools, we have over 150. And again, as Ms. Ray said, those can go anywhere from an academic referral to a student who's suffering from some kind of anxiety or depression, which again, we see pretty frequently in middle school. So we referred the students for additional services there. And additional programming like summer camps, after school things. I got a phone call today about a camp that was like out of state and a parent needed some additional information on it. So that's where that number comes from. And then our community partners, and again, I have to agree with Ms. Race, our numbers are low this year because we've been involved with virtual learning. So at Monticello, they do their grief group through Belfair, and they actually have somebody on staff that is with them, I think 3 days a week. So she runs their grief group and additional groups. And then they've had 15 kids on the Metro Health bus. We used Hospice of Western Reserve, and I've used them for years for our grief groups. And then we have not yet got to get on the bus, but it's happening, and they already have all the paperwork lined up. And I'm very, very excited about having the Metro Health bus as an opportunity for middle school students. Not only from a physical standpoint, but again, when we need to refer kids for mental health and we know there needs to be follow-up, now we can use the Metro Health bus and they will help us follow up and they'll do it for free. So I am so, so excited about having the opportunity for that Metro Health bus next year. Next is high school, I believe. Mr. Murray.
All right, thank you, Anne. All right, so like I talked about before, we felt it was really important for our staff to receive the training that they needed to help our students. And sorry, I have Marley with me. She's like one of our young tigers here. So if you hear a baby in the background, that's her. At one of the first staff meetings of the year, we gave all the staff members a poll to see their knowledge about trauma-informed practices and how comfortable they felt with dealing with students in trauma, and then also what they knew, if they knew what to do if they had a student that was in need. So that was at one of the first staff meetings. Then we looked at those results, and from there, we decided like the kind of PD that we needed. And then at the last staff meeting of the year, the one that we just had, we gave them virtually the same poll to see how their answers varied, to see if the things that we taught, like if they felt more comfortable dealing with students with trauma at the end of the year than they did in the beginning. So from that survey and those results, we did do PD sessions. So our social workers hosted a PD session. So at one of the district PD days, our staff could sign up to get the information directly from our social workers. That presentation was also put into a video. So if you were unable to attend that session, you could see the video at any time. We gave staff tips about co-regulation, emotional self-management, and then guided meditation. And we thought that that was important during these times, like the very uncertain COVID-y days, but then also those are tips that we recommend like moving forward in the future, that these are good for classroom management. Like how does, students that are going through grief, this is not gonna just be a this year thing, it was a last year thing, it is a every year in the future type of thing. So how do we deal with students that are having a difficult time? We also talked about like how do you support students in a virtual environment, like what things to look for on camera, how to create those emotional connections so that students feel comfortable coming to you, even if it is in a setting like this that might not be as personal as we would like. We still have to be open and available for our students. So how do we do that? Also, we provided Tiger Talks. So this was a series in partnership with Metro Health. These were monthly sessions that covered topics like coping with COVID, grief and loss, mental health safety, and helping a friend in crisis. Okay, so we opened up these sessions to families. So that was parents as well as students. They were able to come, have sessions with Metro Health and our social workers to make sure that everybody felt supported. And again, these are also times where families and students can meet staff and get to know us, because that's huge, just having that FaceTime and getting that communication, those lines of communication. And then my favorite thing is the brief, like, one-on-one interventions with students. So as counselors, we are there in the building all the time. Like, I love when kids come in and we talk about problems. You know, there's many roadblocks along the way of education. So, like, how do you get past those things? How do you talk to a teacher that you might not be getting along with? How do you deal with the situation at home? If your grades are not where you want them right now, like, what are the steps that you need to take as a student to make that happen? And I love being a school counselor because we get to teach students those life lessons that hopefully they take into their post-secondary plans. You can use those same skills in college. You can use those same skills in the world of work. Like, how do you deal with adversity? So that's the program that we've implemented at the high school. Next slide, please. So we trained over 150 staff, and then the number of students that we impacted is 1568. So that's the total of number of students in the building. And we felt like, because we're training the staff on how to deal with students in need, everybody that they see, all the students also benefit from that. Another thing that we put into practice in the beginning of the year was being approachable and accessible in any environment. So when we started the year, there's no face-to-face, but we wanted to have that face. We wanted students to feel comfortable reaching out to us. So we added these Bitmoji pages to our guidance website. So we have a page, and then also the social workers have a page, and we're both under the Heights High banner. And so you see our Bitmojis. We have fun making these, especially Mr. Rasul. If you guys know Mr. Rasul, he loves his Bitmoji. He uses his Bitmoji on random emails and stuff all the time. And I will say he did the best of, like, making it look like him. It really does look like him very much. So we had fun with this, and we still use these a lot. And we got good feedback, and hopefully students were able to get to know us a little bit.
Good evening. This Bitmoji slide is to introduce the school social workers. They are K through 12. They are a vital link between the home, school, and community. Their services to students, families, and school personnel promote and support academic, social, emotional, and behavioral success. And the school social workers team is comprised of master-level, multi-licensed professionals that address non-academic barriers that impede learning. They also work collaboratively and often in tandem with the school counselor, school nurse, school psych, administration, and staff. Excuse me. On this slide, the social workers support SEL and themes. The school social workers help students with social and emotional learning from individual to building level. With COVID, there's been an increase of depression, anxiety, suicide ideations, and grief. And these are one of the things that the social workers work with the kids in the Tiger Talks that have gone really well. Social workers introduce prevention work with Tier 1 universal interventions to crisis interventions involving the safety of self and others. Listed are some ways the school social workers utilize to help increase the Ohio Department of Education's social and emotional learning competencies of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. It's important to note that social and emotional learning is not separate from academics, but interwoven and part of the child's whole learning competency and growth. Also, basic needs must be met to support social and emotional growth amongst our students. And I'd like to introduce Mrs. Edie Fiala.
Thank you, Toya. So the next slide, please. As school social workers, we provide support and resources to address basic needs such as food, clothing, and shelter. Addressing these challenges supports academic and social emotional needs, and in turn helps to build school relationships. For example, as mentioned before by Betsy, we host, our district hosts school markets sponsored by the Cleveland Food Bank at Garrity, Boulevard, and Oxford on a monthly basis throughout the school year. We organize the distribution of 4,000 pounds of fresh produce, serving approximately 450 children, adults, and seniors at each market, reducing some stress of food insecurity. Tomorrow is going to be Oxford School Market. Please feel free to stop by. We also advocate for our families when connecting with agencies and other community resources. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Act and the Greater Cleveland Food Bank are linked in on this slide, and there will be more specific data shared later regarding these supports. Allison?
Thank you, Edie. Next slide. As school social workers, we have developed relationships with many faith-based resources and a variety of mental health providers. This allows for a quick and smooth transition of services to our families. We have secured area donations and delivered them to the homes of our families that range from food, clothing, and shoes, rent, utility support, Christmas gifts, grocery certificates, and even furniture. Next slide, please. Additionally, we assist students and families in addressing attendance issues and barriers to attendance. We follow the mandates of the Ohio law, House Bill 410, that addresses habitual truancy. It requires a school attendance intervention team to develop the attendance intervention plan with students and families. We monitor and review the attendance plan, and we also make further instructions regarding what has to be done if the attendance plan is not followed. Approximately 1,700 students in our district qualify for an attendance plan at this point. Social workers were also tasked with developing and presenting an all-school staff training on trauma-informed care in August, and a second training in February for the return to in-person learning. The second training is called our Social Emotional Learning Transition Toolkit. We work on leadership teams to help develop protocols for building-wide safety procedures and best practices. Some of our team members help with the implementation of the PPS system, which you will hear about later in this presentation. We also collaborate with our school counselors to develop and implement the trauma-informed action plans in every building. Next slide. As previously stated in district initiatives, we developed the SEL training at the beginning of the school year for all district staff in the midst of COVID. We also provide ongoing staff support and collaboration to meet the needs of all students. Our social workers sit on the community and state boards, as well as participate in SEL subcommittees. And one of our social workers is also a nationally trained trauma-informed instructor. Thank you. Edie?
The McKinney-Vento Act protects the rights of the children experiencing homelessness and ensures that they have access to free and appropriate public education. If a family loses their housing during the school year, that family has the choice to keep their child or children in the district where they became homeless or in the district where they found shelter. A loss of housing can be related to economic hardship, fire, infestation, eviction, or other issues beyond the control of the family. As of yesterday morning, 4 more students have been added to these numbers. We are now at 99 students identified as eligible to receive McKinney-Vento services. It is the district's responsibility to identify students who are experiencing homelessness. Listed on slide 33, labeled McKinney-Vento, is a breakdown of the children serviced based on grade level and transportation needs. Toya?
Next slide. So for the sake of time, the board can go into these links and look at specific details or numbers for attendance plans. Like we said, the whole district is currently working on 1,713 attendance plans for our students. You can see that the food market has fed almost 2,000 people in conjunction of the social workers working with the counselors. And the McKinney-Vento numbers are on there, like Mrs. Fiala just said. And there's just a lot of data for you to look at. And we had 170 kids that the social workers met with in regards to Tiger Talks, and they surveyed them. And the kids were very happy with the support they received. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining tonight to give an update on the post-secondary planning system. And it's really a nice fit for everything that's been shared from my colleagues tonight and the work that has been done for many years in support of our students for social emotional learning and trauma support for our students and families. But the PPS system, you'll remember, we did do a presentation before on this, but it's both a system and a platform for managing interventions and referrals for those students. And it will allow us to measure the impact of our interventions and our referrals to our community-based providers over time. Next slide. You'll remember these benchmarks and these steps along the pathway to post-secondary success. It's tiny here, but we did do a presentation before and I can share more information with you. But the PPS system uses data gathered from our Infinite Campus system and will allow us on an annual basis to look at where our student body is overall on these steps toward post-secondary success, like our students, for example, making a plan to attend a post-secondary program by the end of grade 9, or are they reading at grade level by the end of grade 3? And these are all the steps that have been correlated as predictive for post-secondary success through work with Johns Hopkins University and SAYS. Next slide. And so the PPS system, as I said, will really allow us to quantify our work around social emotional learning. And it will do that through generating these individualized student growth plans. And those plans are developed through the data from Infinite Campus, but then surveys that our staff, our students, and our families will take that are heavily related to social emotional learning and peer relationships and physical and mental health needs and behaviors of our students. And so you can see here the academic, it's around 3 domains: academic, health, and social emotional domains. Next slide. So a little update on where we've been for PPS, and I feel kind of silly summarizing this on one slide because so many of my colleagues that are joining us tonight have worked a lot on helping us to implement CHUH's version of PPS. But I want to give a couple of examples of the work that we've done. Through our PPS task force, we went through the survey questionnaires that were developed by SAYS, and we reviewed, we edited them, and made some specific suggestions around our district and the needs of our students. And because they feed into this algorithm and are combined with the data from Infinite Campus, every time we made a change or we made a suggested addition to the survey tools, they had to go back to Johns Hopkins, make sure that it had the validity that would allow the PPS system to still function in the way that it's intended. So it was a painstaking process, but one that I think was very beneficial. We then took the Say Yes Cleveland had a portfolio of about 600 provider organizations, and each of those provider organizations had from one to dozens of programs under them. We were able to start, the task force made the decision to start with their provider portfolio instead of starting from scratch. And our task force went through it individually one by one and reduced that provider portfolio down to about a little over 200, 250 that we incorporated into our PPS system for lots of reasons. They weren't appropriate either geographically or they were very neighborhood-based providers that aren't in our community. And then we added our specific providers that the social workers and counselors have been developing those relationships with for many years and have been using to refer our students to already, and we added them into the PPS system. So it has been personalized to our district. We did launch the family surveys last May, round one of family surveys. We launched staff surveys in October of 2020. And the counselors and social workers have all been trained twice in the use of PPS. Remember that they are our main users. They will be the only people in the buildings who will be able to see any student level, individual student level data. And that's for lots of good reasons. They're the users, but we also want people to trust that that student information is kept to a minimum within the buildings. Next slide. So next steps on PPS. So a lot of what we're working on right now is adding our internal programs and supports. So much of what you heard about tonight, we're adding that into PPS because we already had the external programs and referral organizations, but we need to add the internal, the work that we're doing in our buildings by our staff every day. And those are some examples that I listed there. We will be onboarding and training many, if not all, of our providers beginning this summer. So our provider organizations will be able to log on to just a provider portal on PPS where they'll be able to log participation or attendance, for example, in an after-school program. In the fall, we'll be launching family surveys again and student surveys. So students grades 5 and above will take surveys related to their social, emotional, and physical needs, and they'll take those starting in the fall. And then the last thing I wanted to update you on is that Say Yes nationally has decided, though they will keep ownership of the product and will still have the license through Say Yes, we are going to work directly with the support provider that we've been working with through the portal of Say Yes nationally to both host and provide support for the PPS system. And Superintendent Kirby and I have met twice with the team from Say Yes Cleveland to discuss this because that's the path they're taking also, and we believe that it's the right path for us. So that's my update on PPS.
So I'm trying to unmute Felicia.
Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And one that we are looking at as we move forward in our strategic planning is the Arctic scale. We've talked a lot about this Arctic scale, and it is a process where we are able to take the information at multiple time points over several years so that we have a data collection and a way for our work to be really focused on what the needs are for our staff. So it is something that we are exploring for another way for us to be able to quantify the work that is taking place. There are several community partnerships that we have discussed this evening, and we won't go through all of those, but we have so many partners, and we are very happy to have the partners that we have to assist us with the social emotional work that we do in the district. As we think about next steps for 2021, the upcoming school year, as I have shared before, as we think about our strategic plan, we really want to make sure that we have a data collection tool that is actually helping us to be able to truly assess the needs of our students. So we are exploring that Arctic tool also as a partnership with Cleveland State University. We will also continue to review district data, attendance, grades, end of the year survey data that we will be doing to assess where we are in this process for trauma-informed and how the work has actualized by the end of the school year to see exactly what that social emotional impact looks like on academic outcomes as well as our social emotional outcomes. We will also be looking at how do we adjust and prepare. You heard a lot about transitioning back for the first time in our buildings for those students who will be coming the first time and actually going back into our buildings in what we consider the normal way. Also looking at social and emotional support resources, we will continue to provide these to our educators, like many of our staff members have said here today, to be able to support students as they transition in our school. Following up with our end of the year survey to our families and students based on what we learned from our pre-assessment tools, and also using additional support and resources through our Educational Service Center using the Transformative SEL implementation team. And so that is how we'll think about our next steps as we move forward in the next school year, and as well as we transition through our new strategic plan. And this concludes our presentation for this evening. Are there any questions?
There's a lot you guys presented to us. I want to say, just as a board member, this is the first time I've really felt a strong union between the SEL work and the community and schools work that kicked off. It just feels like it's all one piece right now, as opposed to two pieces trying to work together. So I feel really good as a board member about that. It's just my overall thing. Do any of you have any questions?
I am wondering how some of the numbers you presented for this year compare to previous years. For example, the 1,700 students who qualify for a student attendance plan.
Himalia, can you hold on a sec? We're just getting messages that people can't hear us.
Uh-oh.
Molly, you want to try again?
I will try again. I'm
They can hear
interested
you.
in the
Great.
numbers you presented and whether the 1,700 students who qualify for a student attendance plan this year, how does that compare to previous years? Ditto the number of homeless students we have this year, which I assume is much higher than in the past. Can somebody
can
just
probably
kind of
take-
bat that one around, please?
probably take that question, or Felicia, do you want to take that one?
I'm gonna let Edie speak. I'm gonna let Edie speak to the homeless question.
Okay, we have had an increase of about 30 more children this year compared to last year. So yes, we have had a definite increase in families who are experiencing homelessness, most likely, well, directly correlated to the pandemic and not being able to maintain housing.
Have increases, are we getting an echo? We also have increases in chronic absenteeism this year in particular, so that's going to definitely translate into more attendance plans.
Okay.
So I don't have the exact number, but we have been tracking attendance and looking at the trends. We know we have higher chronic absenteeism this year, especially with the changing models and the in and out and all of that, and other challenges we've had in families of experience.
So, I mean, I assume we're going to begin the next school year with, eyes wide open and 2 feet on the ground to try to address some of these issues head on.
Yeah, and exactly, like once we get the end of the year data, there actually have been some schools that have had increases in attendance. So there's some lessons learned there. There definitely are some structures that the teachers and counselors have been using at the schools to positively impact those numbers. But there's also been some places where we've seen some big challenges in particular.
I had a couple of comments. First of all, I wanted to thank our staff for all this work. I know that this has been a really challenging year for everyone, so thank you for what you're doing. My first question is, I know there's a lot of mobility or a lot of transiency in our district, so I just wondered what you do to assess kids who are entering our district and what needs that those families may have.
Anyone want to take that one?
I guess I could speak at the elementary level. I bet it's going to look different.
That's fine.
So when we get new students, our very first thing is interviewing them, interviewing the parents, getting as much information about their background, their past school, all of that kind of information so that we can then look at their academic needs and make sure we're getting those foundational skills in for them. And then we start digging through to get records, lots of phone calls, lots of information, and then transitioning them. So setting them up with a buddy, getting them comfortable in class, and then moving forward that way. That's what it looks like at the elementary schools.
If I could add just one thing that's good about the fact that SAS Cleveland is using the PPS system when students move between our districts, CMSD and CHUH, their student profile and information that's gathered in the surveys moves with them.
At the high school, when we are alerted that we have a new student coming, the first thing that we do is gather records. So we're calling our old school, talking to the counselors, getting their academic records so that we can build their transcript. So that helps us to highlight needs, or everybody's program of study isn't the same that we have at Heights. So I have to make sure that students are scheduled for the correct courses. So if you're a freshman and you were in physical science, we typically give our freshmen bio. So I have to make sure that your schedule lines up with what you had before so that you can get a full credit of whatever course it is. Also, we work closely with the special ed directors and the special ed department to make sure that our kids have the correct services, if they need services, on day one. And then when they come into the building, we have many student service helpers in the guidance office. Every period we have a kid in there. So when I have a new family, I do tours, but I really like for our students to do tours so that they can have a familiar face at lunch and know another kid around the building. So we really try and make sure that the first couple days are smooth. And Heights is such a welcoming place. I love having new kids come in the building, new families come in the building. There's always alive. There's always stuff going on. The extracurriculars are amazing. So I do feel like it's a very welcoming place.
At the middle school, we really try to get the parents in the door, because sitting down and speaking with the parent face to face gives a lot of information and support to the parent and the student. So our priority is to get the student and the parent in so we can talk to them, meet them. And then our students have what we call ambassadors, that hopefully stay with them all day unless someone gets lost, which sometimes happens. But that it gets them through the day. It gives the parent a ton of comfort to know that their child won't be alone. But again, I find sitting down and talking to the parent face to face, we can get a lot of information and then figure out what they need and go from there.
That we integrate these great services and this work into our summer camp that we're going to be offering this year.
Counselors and social workers that will be working with us this summer.
I'd just like to say I want to thank you all, how you have worked together collectively to meet the needs of not only our students, but our staff, giving out resources, and to each other. I have a question regarding Say Yes, and that probably to Nancy. You said this is no longer a national program, or they're going to be pulling out nationally. Can you clarify that for me?
Sure. Say Yes National is no longer looking to provide additional the scholarship cities like they did with CMSD. So they're also pulling back from providing the direct support for the software and the program and asking us to work directly and contract directly with the provider that we've been working with all along. Anyway, it's a software company, and we'll still purchase the license from Say Yes. They'll still own the product, but we'll work directly with a company called Moravia to get the support and the hosting for the product.
Question. One other question about the, I believe it was the mental health. Now those services are provided for middle school and high school?
So Metro Health has been operating the clinic at the high school for a couple of years, but they just took over operating the mobile units at our elementary, and they added our middle schools this spring. So that's been very positively received by our families and our staff at those other buildings. So we're no longer working with Cleveland Clinic on the mobile units. We're working with Metro, and it's a more seamless relationship with them.
Okay.
I'd actually like to sort of follow up on that. Can you tell us a little bit, Nancy, about the timetable, the frequency of those Metro Health bus visits to the schools?
Well, they just started in April. And so the initial plan was only to have them visit each of the, I think it was 4 elementary schools, I believe off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I'm not 100% sure on that. And the 2 middle schools once, but then they were Monticello. The response was so positive that they asked to schedule an additional date. So next year, depending on the enrollment, that's always the key, how many families complete the enrollment forms, depending on the enrollment, they would likely be able to go monthly to our buildings if there's enough interest and response. And they're going to have the clinic open at the high school every Friday over the summer.
Good.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Thank you.
Any other questions, anybody? Well, if staff wasn't able to hear what I said immediately upon concluding their presentation, I was just saying that it was really wonderful, very, very thorough. And for me, as a board member that has been here for, 6, 7 years now, it's the first time I really, really felt a true union between the SEL work and the community and schools work. I mean, it always seemed like they're two valuable objects, but now it really seems like they're just one cohesive group, and that's, you know, that's exactly what it was meant to be when it was envisioned, and it's just really, really good to hear. So thank you very much. Appreciate all your time. This was obviously a labor of love to put together. It's a very thorough presentation, lots of links, a lot of stuff for us to review, so thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. Ms. Kirby?
Yes, thank you, team, counselors, social workers. Really appreciate your work. Ed Services team, as Jim said, this is a labor of love. This year in particular, we have relied so heavily on you, and I know you have carried a lot of heavy stories and heavy work in your hearts this year. So I want to thank you for that. Not only supporting our students, but also supporting our staff and parents and families as well, and really thinking about all the ways that we need to support. I think it really speaks to our commitment as a district to the whole child, and how this side of the work is just as important as our academic metrics. Like, this is that foundation to those pieces. So thank you again. We're going to now turn to, we have a guest joining us this evening, and I want to thank Jennifer Hogue in advance. We had some technical issues in getting some things set up, which has delayed us a bit. Jennifer Hogue is with us from the Ohio School Boards Association. I know, Kathan, you can start loading the presentation. Jennifer Hogue is with us from the Ohio School Board Association, and we reached out to ask if they could provide a legislative update, and Jennifer actually is the Director of Legislative Services. So if there's any questions about what's happening in Columbus, I know Jennifer can answer it. So I will turn it over to you, Jennifer, and you can just let Kathan Kavanaugh, she's our Supervisor of Communications, and she'll advance your slides.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me this evening. Before I start, I just want to say, wow, what an amazing team you have, and what amazing things they are doing for students. That's the kind of thing legislators need to hear about, the amazing work that's happening. You can tell just from each of them and how they presented that they are passionate about their work and passionate about your students, so you should be very proud. I want to talk with you tonight about a few different things. The first, just kind of talking about the biennial budget process, sort of where we have been up to this point and where we will be heading in the next few weeks as we wrap up the budget process. Give you an update on what's in the budget bill right now as it stands. Talk a little bit about new emerging legislation that's concerning the backpack bill, and then talk a little bit about advocacy with you as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to skip through these first 4 slides just in the interest of time, but you're more than welcome to go back and review them. And if you have questions, let me know. So if you want to go ahead and advance to that slide that's titled Executive Budget Process. We'll talk a little bit about that. So the budget really does kick off much earlier than we typically see it. So every agency makes requests, and so the education requests come from the Department of Education, and those go to the Office of Budget and Management. And the governor works with the Office of Budget and Management and the Department of Education to help form and craft his education recommendations. If you want to go to the next slide, those education recommendations then get rolled into an as introduced version of the budget. And so that budget bill starts out in the House. It's customarily sponsored by the House Finance Chairman, which this year is Representative Scott Wolfsleger from Canton. The House typically takes their time with the budget, and they work on it from February all the way through to April or mid-May. And then at that point in time, it moves on to the Senate. And they handle their budget process a little bit differently in the Senate. So they'll start out having hearings in the full Finance Committee in the House, and they'll hear from the major agencies. So the Office of Budget Management, the Legislative Service Commission will come in and give a fiscal picture or outlook for the state. And then they'll sort of break up into subcommittees. And so there is a subcommittee that handles just primary and secondary education, and they really take a deep dive into those education portions of the bill. And that's really where the work on the education portions occurs, is in that subcommittee process and with those members that sit on that subcommittee. Once the subcommittee has finished their work, they will then send that bill back to the full House Finance Committee, and they'll put together a substitute version of the bill. At that point in time, we refer to the bill then as the House version of the budget. They'll have some hearings on that substitute version, and then they'll do one more round of changes. And they do that through what's called an omnibus amendment. So they'll take all of the amendments that have been submitted by the various members of the House. They'll pull out the ones that they want to include in the bill, and then they'll shove those all into one big omnibus amendment and adopt that. At that point in time, they'll go ahead and do their committee vote out of the House Finance Committee, and then it's on to the House floor where they'll vote the House version out of that chamber. And so then the bill moves on across the State House over to the Senate, and the process starts all over again. And so this process in the Senate usually goes from April to early May when they get the bill to mid-June. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule in this budget process, and so that's a good thing. And they handle theirs a little bit in the same way. So instead of having the subcommittees, they'll have the education committees hear the education portions of the bill. So the Senate Education Committee, chaired by Senator Andrew Brenner, heard the education portions. They wrapped up their work just last week. And so now they have moved on back to the full Senate Finance Committee, and they're having hearings this week. The hearing on the education portions occurred yesterday. You had great representation from your coalition at the committee. In fact, Senator Dolan sang their praises and said that the committee is well aware of the unique fiscal situations in your district because of the work of board members that have testified, your superintendent, and then of course members of that coalition. So you have done a great job of sharing that information and making sure that they're informed. And so then once they finish their work, they will do a substitute bill. We are hearing that the Senate will unveil their substitute bill around June 1st or 2nd. So we're just a couple weeks away from seeing what their plans will be. And then again, they will have the omnibus amendment as well. So another round of changes will be coming. And then they will have their committee votes before it goes to the floor for a full vote of the Senate, which their target date to do that is June 10th. So we're heading down the pike, but there's still lots of opportunities to engage. Once the Senate takes their vote, they're going to send that back over to the House because they're going to make changes in the Senate. And the House will either say, yes, we agree with you, or no, we don't. I have never seen a budget bill where the chambers agree. So I'm pretty sure that they will say no. And then that heads us into a process referred to as the conference committee process. The conference committee will be made up of 3 members from the House and 3 members from the Senate, appointed by the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. The very first piece of business for that conference committee will be deciding which version of the budget they will work from. They will select either to work from the House version and make changes to that, or they'll work from the Senate version and make changes to that version. So that's the first step in the process. Then we don't hear from the conference committee again for a while. All of the work on that conference committee report happens behind the scenes. So a lot of conversations between the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate. They'll confer with their minority leadership in both of those chambers, as well as a lot of conversation with the governor. And they'll start to kind of see where they can work together on issues and what they should put in that final conference committee report. Once they get that report, they'll sort of read through all of the decisions that they have made, and they'll take a vote on that conference committee report. Once they've done that conference committee report, that report goes simultaneously to both the House and the Senate floors, and they have the choice to vote it up or down on that report. They don't have another opportunity to make changes to the bill at that time. And then the bill will head to the governor for his signature. The governor has some ability to make changes at this point, and so there will still be time to engage. Move forward to the next slide. The governor does have line item veto authority because this is a bill with appropriations in it. So he can choose, rather than just signing the bill or vetoing the entire bill, to carve out certain portions. So if there's something in the budget, once it comes out of conference committee and that report is accepted, we still have the ability to advocate for change and to advocate for the governor to use that line item veto authority. And so then there are 2 different effective dates in budget bills. Usually the funding portions are effective immediately, and a lot of the policy measures will be effective in 90 days. So again, we'll have an ability to do a referendum if there is something in that budget bill that is problematic for districts.
So that's where we are with the Senate budget process. Of course, in terms of school funding, House Bill 110 is the budget bill this year. And the House has chosen to go with the Fair School Funding Plan, which we are excited about. It is different, though, than what we saw in the last General Assembly with House Bill 305. And earlier this General Assembly with House Bill 1, there have been some modifications. It remains largely intact, though, so we still see that it's a 3-step process for funding schools, really taking into account the unique needs of students, districts, layering on those categorical amounts to help with the unique needs of students, and then calculating a state and local share that takes into account both property valuation and income for every district. The bill also calls for some studies in some additional areas such as economically disadvantaged students and preschool education funding, really doing what's needed for students in those 2 areas. And probably one of the most exciting things, and one of the things I know your district has long advocated for, is direct funding of those school choice options. So no more deductions. That's something that we have also been advocating for, and I'm very glad to see it in this bill and hope it remains in the Senate. The bill, though, does establish a general phase-in over 6 years for almost all of the different funding amounts. So you're looking at about 16.67% in the first year and about 33% in the second year of the biennium. It does, however, eliminate the original Fair School Funding Plan's priority to pay upfront full dollar amounts for disadvantaged pupil impact aid and ESC funding. Those are being funded in a little bit differently. So when you look at that, the DPIA is slated to be funded at 0% in the first fiscal year and 14% in the second year of the biennium. We have asked for that to be brought up to be on par with all of the other components, at the very least, if not being fully funded, because we know that those dollars make a difference. Also establishes a temporary guarantee for districts. I think about 93 districts would see a loss of funding in the beginning of the phase. Look at 3 pots of money that districts are getting now. Their foundation aid before the state reductions were made during COVID, the student wellness and success funds that districts are receiving today, and then some districts are receiving that enrollment growth supplement if they're seeing student numbers go up. So when you combine those 3 pots of money, no district should be receiving less than that over the course of the next biennium under the House Bill 110 as it stands now. The bill also establishes that 19-member oversight commission to take a look at the formula over time, how it's being implemented, and to recommend changes. We are very excited to have 3 school board members that will sit on that work group as well to provide those unique perspectives. In terms of the student wellness and success funds that the governor proposed in his as introduced version, it maintains the dollar amount that was in there of the $1.1 billion, but it reappropriates that and redirects it to be spent on the base cost components of the Fair School Funding Plan, as well as the DPIA. They tried to keep some of the portions of the governor's original intent of the student wellness and success funds. If you'll remember, there are certain community partners that you need to work with in spending those dollars. They have applied those same requirements to the DPIA funding. And so we have asked that they take that requirement away and allow districts to pick and choose which community partners they will work with and how they will spend those dollars. We've heard some indications from the Senate as they work through their version of the budget that they're probably not going to go with the Fair School Funding Plan. We are continuing to advocate that that be the path that they take, but we're hearing indications that they may use some of the portions of that, but that they have their own plan. One thing that I have heard them express consistently is that they are going to keep the no deductions and the direct funding of schools of choice in their formula, whatever that may be. So we hope we will see that soon, June 1st or 2nd. We're continuing to try to get more information on what their plan is, but this time they're being very tight-lipped. Another bill that was just recently introduced is House Bill 290. It's being referred to as the backpack bill. Introduced by 2 Republican legislators. It also has 16 other Republicans that have signed on as co-sponsors. One thing that is notable about that list of co-sponsors is that no members of the Republican leadership team have signed on to that bill. I find that to be slightly promising. We'll need to continue to watch this one closely, but that gives me some sort of comfort. The bill is very light on details. It is really what they call an intent bill. It just has a paragraph stating that it's the intent of the General Assembly to have a school funding formula that calculates funding for a student and then lets parents decide which educational setting they will choose for that student, which could be really problematic and chaotic. The bill at this time has been referred to the House Finance Committee, but no hearings have been scheduled. So again, definitely one to watch. Hopefully they will not try to do that in tandem with the budget. Really another important thing I want to touch on this evening is advocacy, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. If I could pick a model district that does advocacy at the State House, you would definitely be at the top of the list. You all are amazing at showing up, and when I used to work in the Senate, my boss would always tell me, Jennifer, every decision we make is because of the people who show up. The world is run by the people who show up, and it's so true. Legislators are making decisions with the information that they're given, and if we're not there giving that information, they are making assumptions, which are usually wrong, and making decisions that are not in the best interest of our students. So it's extremely important, and I think you all do great work. You do an amazing job of localizing legislation and sharing your story. You are an expert in education issues. We have some legislators that come from, board seats or the superintendency or the classroom. And I would say they're education experts as well. But for the most part, members of the General Assembly are generalists and not specialists. And it's just because they're dealing with a ton of issues each and every day. And so it's important that you bring your perspective and your expertise to the State House. Lots of things and ways to get involved, listed some of those there, but I really want to say that probably the most important thing is to get to know your legislators. Make sure that you know them before you're going to need them, because having the access and the ability to do that and making sure that they know and understand your district and the amazing work you're doing, being proactive rather than reactive is extremely important. It's also important, we have about 9 different steps for advocacy that we feel make good, effective advocates. And you can actually find that booklet on our website. It's entitled Effective Advocacy for School Leaders. And I've taken these steps from here and just kind of condensed them down. Just going to hit some highlights on those, but really knowing and understanding concerns at both the local, state, and national level. And so just want to reiterate that at OSBA, we are here to help you. If you ever need information on a piece of legislation or you want to know what we're hearing about something, please reach out and call or email. We are happy to help assist you in your role as an advocate. Step number 2 is knowing your district, which I think you all do an amazing job, making sure that you understand how things are going to impact your district and then sharing that with legislators. You're great at that. Keep it up. Step 3, knowing where you stand, making sure you have specific positions on things and know what issues are being discussed and debated. And knowing your decision makers, making sure that you have personal relationships with legislators, but also district relationships with those legislators, making sure that they hear the great things that are happening in your district. And then it's also important to have relationships with other leaders, in the business community, civic leaders in your community, and then also local government leaders. There are a lot of times we're able to partner, especially on tax issues, with libraries and townships and municipalities. So having those relationships is important. Also knowing how to contact your decision makers. Every legislator is a little bit different, so knowing what form of communication they like the best is good. Having ongoing communication is probably one of the most important things. It's something that I think we need to work on in public education, is bragging about the great work we're doing, because there are so many amazing stories to tell. So having that ongoing communication about the success stories of your students and your programming. And then also follow up on communication, making sure that you thank the legislators when they listen and they do what you ask them to, and hold them accountable when they don't. Thank them for meeting with you, but let them know that you're watching and they didn't do what you asked them to, but that you look forward to working with them in the future. And also knowing how to contact them is important. Also knowing the calendar for decision making, which we've talked about tonight with the budget bill, just knowing where those key pressure points are and the ability to make the change. And knowing how to state your case is extremely important. Probably one of the most effective ways to do that is through committee testimony. but it's also important to sit down and have those one-on-one meetings. And if you can't make it to Columbus to have those meetings, it's often better to catch them when they're back home in the district. They will have more dedicated time to you and not being pulled in a million different directions with legislative committees and House or Senate session. And it's also important to reach out to the public, organizing an advocacy group, which you have an amazing one in your district. And so I think you're hitting the nail right on the head with that. And then also making sure you understand the electoral process and the role that you play in that process. Probably one of the most important things that you can do is to promote informed voting. And a lot of districts will hold meet the candidate nights and invite policymakers in to do a Q&A with the community around education issues, just so everyone can understand where those candidates stand on public education. And so really moving forward and looking at advocacy with where we are at this point in the budget bill, I think probably the most important thing to tell you is don't stop. Continue doing more of what you've been doing, and keep that contact up with phone calls and testimony and emails. The most important thing is not to do form letters. They tend to get ignored, but really personalized, tailored communication is important. And not just focusing on the Senate at this point, even though that's where we are with the budget bill, but really taking it back to the House and reinforcing the communications that you've already had with those House members, making sure that they are prepared and with you going into the conference committee process, and then also having communication in the governor's office and sharing your story there with the governor and then also the governor's policy folks, to make sure that as they enter those conference committee discussions, they're well informed about your district situation and your thoughts and feelings on the budget bill. I'd be happy to take questions now, or if you want to wait and do those in a bit, we can do that as well.
Have one more slide just to connect to your 10 advocacy steps, or 9 steps, which are wonderful, by the way. And so if you just go to that next slide here, I just wanted to document some of the things in our district that we have been doing. There are 2 bullet points that are not on here, so I want to mention those first. The first is our treasurer, Scott Gaynor, was on a panel about fair school funding last week of Northeast Ohio that was sponsored by Senator Williams. We also had a CHUH parent on that. The second piece is we have an advocacy committee also.
She can't hear
our board
She can't
has.
hear us.
Okay. Oh, they can't hear. They can't hear me. I'm using this, right?
You're good.
You're good now.
Okay. So just want to make sure, first thing is thanking Scott Gaynor for participating on the Northeast Ohio Fair School Funding Town Hall last week, sponsored by Senator Williams. In addition, we do have an advocacy committee that is composed of parents and community stakeholders that are engaging in a lot of the steps you've outlined, Jennifer. Other really quick pieces, we do have information that we've been sharing in our weekly communications to families and staff on advocacy, so just listed there for convenience. Jennifer, you did mention the testimony. I did testimony in addition to community stakeholders who came down yesterday to do testimony as well. And the Heights Coalition for Public Education is asking stakeholders to send a message about in support of fair school funding every Wednesday. So I've added the language that they've shared with me, but to your point, Jennifer, it suggested that it is used to inspire more personal talking points to share. So, and then also, I can't stop without noting Heights High sophomore Kenji Sakaye, who was recently in Cleveland.com with a letter to the editor about fair school funding. So we have every stakeholder in our district who's engaged in this work. So just wanted to note that. And so let's take questions for Jennifer. I told you she could answer every question about this process that we probably could possibly have. Any questions or comments?
Well, can you hear me, Jennifer? Excellent. A couple of things that I just think are really important. So I've talked to some of my colleagues and pretty much everybody who will listen about HB 110, and one of the weaknesses that's significant is that in the first 2 years, only 50% of it gets funded, and it's sort of back-ended with 50% in the final biennial budget, which would be 4 years from now. And I've been following this a long time. I've never seen 2 pro-education biennial budgets in a row. So I just think that that's a really important piece for us to keep in mind. Your presentation was the first time that I was made aware of the Oversight Commission. And I think that that is a really interesting opportunity. And I would like for the OSBA to throw all of their weight around to put me on that in one of those 3 board positions if I am blessed by my neighbors with another term.
You could be a teacher instead if you need.
Yeah, I could be a teacher also, by the
or
way.
a parent.
I am a public school teacher as well. So please, a little help on that. But Jennifer, I'm also really interested in one thing we didn't talk about tonight much was the lobbying efforts that OSBA does on issues. And I've been really concerned in the past couple of weeks as we've seen an extremist legislator from Geauga County named Diane Grendel promote a bill that would ban critical race theory and other what they call disruptive theories. As a public school teacher myself who teaches American history, and also as a person of conscience and living in 2021, this really worries me, and I wonder if there's anything that we can do as a board and members of OSBA to push this higher up in the pecking order of things that OSBA should be taking a stand on. So I'd like to just hear your response on that issue.
That is a great question. And I think it depends on how you look at what she's proposing. So we have the racism and equity plank that just was introduced into our platform last year during the delegate assembly. And so we can look at it through that lens. We don't have anything that speaks specifically to critical race theory or some of the other things that she alluded to wanting to limit in her co-sponsor request. So that's something that we probably, if you're interested in making a change to the legislative platform to include that, it would require a resolution from a board to do so, and we can entertain that as well. I think if that bill comes up for a hearing, we would definitely oppose it on the basis of the fact that we are strong advocates of local control, and that should be up to each and every district in the state to determine what's best for their community and best for their students in terms of their curriculum and what they're choosing to teach in their classrooms.
Thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
Dan, usually you have all sorts of stuff here, but I mean, that's a big one.
Jennifer did all the work for me tonight.
It's great, and a great answer. So you're supposed to reward people when they give you the answer that you want, right? At least that's what we've learned tonight. Well, Jennifer, thanks for being here. I do have a question, and it is about how we can work around barriers that we've seen. So Matt Dolan is one of the Northeastern Ohio local one of the senators, and chair of the Finance Committee, and essentially put a kibosh to the fair school funding legislation as it was back at the end of the year. What can we do to try to get around some of these barriers? Well, first of all, he's not in our district. There's a group, the Northeastern Ohio School Board President's Group, and they actually did meet with Matt Dolan, which is wonderful. I'm not sure he actually acted on some of the things that he said, or at least that's what I had heard through the other members. But how can we deal with barriers like that?
That's a great question, and one that often frustrates me each and every day in the work that we do. I think really the most important thing to keep in mind is don't give up. Continue talking with him, pushing him, engaging the districts that are in his Senate district that vote to decide whether or not he's going to come back to the State House. And I think it's really important that legislators understand, and we need to reiterate, that a funding formula is desperately needed. We have gone 2 years without one at a time when our students need that funding the most, that we're continuing to sort of ignore the constitutional mandate that they get funding right for students and funding right for districts. And so just continuing to push and also engaging the districts that he represents.
I was a little blindsided when I heard about House Bill 290, the backpack bill. What are the chances of something like that coming in and just sort of disrupting this whole thing? I guess maybe it's a loaded question. I guess we don't know.
But I will say there are some things that give me some comfort. So we've heard some senators say that they don't have an interest in doing it, that they don't think that that's the way to go, that we already have several choice programs in the state, and so that's not necessary. I'm also sort of comforted by the fact that no member of the Republican leadership has signed on to that bill in the House. I would be more concerned if I saw some names like Bill Sykes or Bob Cupp or Don Jones. But I am still concerned because it's a bill that's out there. It's a bill that's been introduced, and it's a bill that's going to continue to live and breathe until the end of the next calendar year when the General Assembly sunsets. So it's something we're going to have to watch. I think it would be very difficult for the legislature to try to do that right now while tackling a funding formula. So I'm not immediately concerned, but that doesn't stop them from taking it up as soon as they come back in the fall.
Going to happen is we're going to spend all this time to try to, get essentially the fair funding bill passed in whatever form it's in, and then all of a sudden we're going to see someone put on the brakes again, which is what we saw 2 years ago. That says, oh, we're just not going to look at this because we have another thing that we really need to have people sit down and talk about again. Whereas there was thousands of stakeholders working on the fair funding piece. Of both parties, bipartisan. No bill is perfect, obviously, and some people sort of whine a little bit about this and whine a little bit about this, but it points us in the right direction. And that's one of the things I know Dan's concerned about, that it's not fully funded until 6 years and has got to go through multiple other budget cycles. But at least we've got a path that we're on to see some kind of relief. And it's not the perfect relief for us, but it's relief that'll certainly be helpful.
Right, and that's next year. On the book, tinker with it along the way if that needs to occur, but getting it on the books is what's extremely important now.
Jennifer?
I just wanted to thank Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. I'm Jody Serini. I know we have exchanged many emails, and I appreciate all of the work that you've done for us. And I also appreciate the fact that you helped us introduce some ideas we had into the legislative platform of OSBA. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I think you know this district well enough that we would be happy to be down in Columbus anytime we need to be there to be providing testimony and to make sure that our story is heard. We're clearly in a unique position, and we're uniquely affected by a lot of things that we've been told are unintended consequences. Well, I'd like to make sure that that gets turned around. So thank you.
Reiterate, if there's anything that you feel like we can do as a board or a community, please reach out to us. We're very fortunate that we've got strong advocates that live here and really believe in public education, and it can't be harmed, which is what we have seen over and over and over again. If there's no other questions, I'd like to just say thank you. I know you had to wait a little bit while we had to go through the one presentation. Thank you again. Very, very helpful. I think it would be really great if we can get a piece of this sliced out of this presentation and put a video. A separate website or a separate news item for community members. Just so that they can sort of see it and understand the dynamics. I think it would be extremely helpful.
We will do that.
So.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Well, we are about to close this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Hines?
Yes.
Ms. Serini?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.